In a landmark and highly anticipated decision, the United States Supreme Court has stepped in to halt the controversial Liberation Day tariffs, sending shockwaves through the nation's political and economic landscape. By doing so, the court is directly challenging the limits of presidential authority, raising fundamental questions about the separation of powers and the checks and balances that define American democracy. The ruling, announced on November 2, 2025, immediately freezes billions of dollars in import taxes, throwing the administration's budget plans into disarray and creating a wave of uncertainty for businesses, investors, and consumers across the country. Markets reacted swiftly, with stocks fluctuating and business leaders scrambling to assess the impact. For years, American companies, especially manufacturers and importers, have struggled under the weight of these tariffs, facing higher costs, disrupted supply chains, and shrinking profit margins. Now, with the court's intervention, this era of trade warfare has come to an abrupt and dramatic halt, leaving many to wonder what comes next for American industry and global commerce. Internationally, the decision signals a possible shift away from the protectionist policies that have defined recent years, and it is being closely watched by America's trading partners and rivals alike. The move raises urgent questions about America's future role in the global economy, and whether the country will embrace a more open approach to trade or continue to pursue aggressive economic nationalism. The case at the heart of this decision, Learning Resources versus Trump, was brought by a broad coalition of businesses and states. They argued that the president had overstepped constitutional bounds by imposing taxes, an authority reserved for Congress under the Constitution. The Supreme Court's siding with the plaintiffs is a major check on executive power, setting a precedent that legal scholars and policymakers will study for years to come. Now, the government faces the daunting prospect of refunding up to $90 billion in tariffs already collected, a fiscal shock that could worsen the national deficit and force difficult budget decisions in Washington. This historic decision forces a national reckoning on trade, presidential power, and America's place in the world, as citizens, lawmakers, and businesses alike grapple with the far-reaching consequences of the Supreme Court's intervention. A tariff is a tax placed on goods that are brought into a country from abroad. When a government imposes a tariff, it essentially raises the price of imported products, making them more expensive for consumers and businesses to buy. The main goal is to encourage people to buy products made within their own country, supporting local industries and jobs. By making foreign goods costlier, tariffs can help domestic companies compete more effectively, but they can also lead to higher prices for everyday items. Governments have used tariffs for centuries as a tool to protect local businesses from overseas competition. However, tariffs are often controversial because they can spark trade disputes, hurt international relationships, and sometimes even backfire by making things more expensive for everyone. Former President Trump made tariffs a signature part of his America First economic agenda. He argued that the United States was losing out due to massive trade deficits and the decline of American manufacturing jobs, blaming unfair trade practices by other countries. In April 2025, Trump's administration announced a sweeping new policy, a baseline 10% tariff on nearly all imported goods, with some tariffs climbing as high as 50%. The administration used the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, as the legal justification for these actions. By declaring the trade deficit a national emergency, the White House bypassed Congress's usual authority over taxes and tariffs. This move was highly controversial, raising questions about presidential power and the balance of government. The administration's bold strategy was aimed especially at countries like China, hoping to pressure them into changing their trade practices and open their markets more to American goods. Tariffs were presented as a powerful bargaining chip in international negotiations. However, the approach was risky, sparking fierce opposition from business leaders, economists, and even some politicians who worried about the impact on global trade and the economy. Ultimately, the policy was designed to rebalance global trade in America's favor, but it came with significant economic and political costs, including higher prices, strained alliances, and uncertainty for businesses and consumers alike. The legal challenge was led by Rick Woldenberg, CEO of Learning Resources, joined by states and small businesses crushed by the tariffs. Their argument: the president usurped Congress's exclusive power to levy taxes, using IEEPA as a backdoor for sweeping economic changes. They invoked the major questions doctrine, insisting Congress must clearly authorize such vast powers. Critics argued a chronic trade deficit isn't the kind of emergency IEEPA was meant to address. This was more than a fight over tariffs. It was a constitutional showdown over the limits of presidential power. The Supreme Court was set to decide one of the most significant disputes over executive authority in recent history. Behind the legal battle are real stories of American business owners hit hard by tariffs. These are not just numbers on a spreadsheet or headlines in the news. These are people whose livelihoods, dreams, and communities are on the line. Every day they face tough decisions and mounting uncertainty, all while trying to keep their businesses afloat. Rick Woldenberg's learning resources faced millions in new costs, forcing him to cancel expansion, scrap hiring plans, and slash budgets. The company had to put growth on hold, disappointing employees and partners who had hoped for new opportunities. The ripple effects were felt throughout the organization, from the warehouse floor to the executive suite. "We're smaller and make less money," he said, summing up the toll. The sense of loss was not just financial, but deeply personal, as years of hard work seemed to unravel almost overnight. David Levi of Microkit saw tariffs on imported components soar, crippling his business and slashing revenue by more than half. He watched as his customer base shrank and his ability to innovate was stifled by costs he couldn't control. U.S. alternatives were either unavailable or prohibitively expensive. For many, there simply was no way to replace the lost parts or materials, leaving shelves empty and customers disappointed. Victor Schwartz, a New York wine importer, lost $200,000 to tariffs, devastating for a small business. That loss meant cutting back on staff, reducing orders, and facing the real possibility of closing his doors for good. These entrepreneurs faced impossible choices: absorb costs, raise prices, or cut staff. Each option risked alienating customers, hurting employees, or jeopardizing the future of the business. Unlike large corporations, small businesses couldn't lobby for exemptions or shift production. They lacked the resources and political connections to influence policy, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. For many, the tariffs threatened their very survival, turning the American dream into a struggle. What once felt like a path to prosperity now seemed like an uphill battle just to stay open. Their stories fueled the legal fight, highlighting the ground-level impact of national policy. These business owners became advocates, sharing their experiences in courtrooms and community meetings determined to make their voices heard. The tariffs meant to protect American industry often hurt the very businesses they were supposed to help. The unintended consequences rippled through towns and cities, affecting families, workers, and local economies. The legal battle became a fight for economic survival and constitutional principle, a struggle not just for profit but for the future of small business in America. The Trump administration defended tariffs as essential for national security and economic revival, arguing decades of unfair trade deals had gutted U.S. manufacturing. Supporters claimed tariffs generated $100 billion for the Treasury and gave the U.S. leverage in global negotiations. They insisted the president's actions were within his authority and not subject to judicial review. Opponents countered that tariffs were illegal, damaging, and ultimately a tax on American consumers and businesses. They argued tariffs fueled inflation, hurt competitiveness, and had little effect on the trade deficit. Critics warned that using IEEPA for chronic economic issues was an unprecedented overreach, threatening the constitutional balance of power. The debate was about more than economics. It was about the limits of presidential authority. The Supreme Court's ruling in Learning Resources versus Trump is a landmark reaffirmation of the separation of powers. By halting the tariffs, the court set a clear limit on the president's use of emergency powers for broad economic changes. The decision reasserts that Congress, not the president, holds the power to tax and regulate commerce. Had the court ruled otherwise, future presidents could have imposed sweeping mandates by simply declaring emergencies. Instead, the ruling reinforces congressional authority and pushes back against decades of expanding executive power. This outcome will force future administrations to work with Congress on major economic initiatives. The decision clarifies the constitutional roles of each branch in shaping national policy. The Supreme Court's decision has immediate far-reaching economic consequences. The government must refund up to $90 billion in tariffs, straining an already deficit-ridden budget. For businesses like Learning Resources and Microkits, the ruling brings relief, lifting financial burdens and opening the door to recovery. Consumers may see lower prices on imported goods, easing inflation. However, the loss of projected tariff revenue jeopardizes key policy and tax proposals. Industries once protected by tariffs now face renewed competition from imports. The abrupt change creates uncertainty, forcing businesses to adapt quickly. Markets and the dollar may fluctuate as investors reassess U.S. economic policy. The nation stands at a crossroads, with the court's ruling resetting the terms of trade. America must now rethink its economic strategy in a rapidly changing global landscape. The Supreme Court's decision reverberates globally, signaling a shift away from protectionism. America's trading partners welcome the move, hoping for more predictable, collaborative trade relations. Global markets may rally as barriers fall and supply chains reopen. Exporters to the U.S. gain a competitive edge, while countries like China must recalibrate their strategies. The ruling resets U.S.-China relations, moving the conflict beyond tariffs to new fronts. The world now watches to see if Congress will craft new trade policies or if the executive will seek other avenues. The debate over globalization is far from over. The Supreme Court has simply opened a new chapter. Businesses, governments, and citizens worldwide must adapt to a future where American trade policy is once again up for debate.